morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bahati Mbambe, as has been introduced. I'm here to discuss with you the best practice of utilizing the FIDIC lead book. I'm going to concentrate on the current version, not the revised one. Now, as we all know, FIDIC started back in 1957 as the condition of contract international for works of civil engineering based on the ICE condition 4th edition. As what FIDIC is doing, they always update this form of contract. In particular, I'm going to concentrate on the FIDIC, which was updated in 1999, where they produced what is called Rainbow Suite of Contract, which comprises of Red Book, Yellow Book, Silver Book, and the Green Book. Since then, FIDIC has produced other books. It should be appreciated that even the way they are doing now, FIDIC always update the books when they receive some feedbacks from users. I was speaking this morning with Shivan. She's saying that FIDIC, the current one, has been delayed. Last year they told us it will come out at the end of December. Up to now it has been delayed because they are still receiving some feedbacks from users like you. One might argue that this is one of the reasons that FIDIC is used in different parts of the world. And Africa, we are not different from it. And I'll argue that this is one of the advantages FIDIC has, because from time to time, they up-to-date basing on people's comments, their users. The focus of our discussion is on the conditions of contract for construction, the first edition, the Red Book of 1999. Among all, the Rainbow Suite, the Red Book is the most widely used. One may ask a question, why is widely used? This is simply because it uses the traditional method of procurement, whereby the employer, by the help of his engineer and the consultants, they define and interpret the employer's requirement. And the contractor, on other hand, is just being told what to do. So since you are still using this tradition, I know things are changing now. Because of that, that's why the Red Book is still being widely used. Our discussion is going to focus on the best practice of using this Red Book. We're going to touch on the key do and the don't do. I'm aware that, basing on the feedback FIDIC has received through all these years, maybe what I'm going to discuss this morning, they might be overtaken with a new edition. Let's hope that some of them are going to be taken. I've selected some clauses and the sub-clauses in this discussion. The current FIDIC has 20 clauses and more than 100 sub-clauses. So you understand that with the span of 1 hour, there's no way we can cover everything. I work for Contractor, so my discussion is based from the contractor's perspective. I'm sure that there are many contractors here. They'll be able to know how other people on other parts of the world or in Africa, how we have some common problems which we face when using this form of contract, and how one can make use of FIDIC when he's using it. The first subclause which I've selected is the priority of documents. FIDIC Red Book provide the priority of document in that sequence. You start with the contract agreement, the letter of acceptance, the letter of tender, the particular of conditions, the general conditions, which is FIDIC itself, the general one which has been published by FIDIC. Then you have specification, drawings, and the schedule. This sequence has been put by FIDIC in that manner with a reason. However, before signing the contract, by using appendix to tender or particular condition of contract, employer tend to amend the general condition of contract. Now, in Africa, one needs to be careful. There's some employers, for some reasons, they know themselves, they tend to change the sequence. So as a contractor, you need to make sure that the sequence is exactly as what has been suggested by FIDIC. For example, one may try to place the bill of quantities or the schedule, which is below the line, and he can put on top of specifications. If it happens like that, in case of any contradiction between the documents, it can be a problem. So a prudent contractor should make sure that in case of any amendment, at least follows the sequence what FIDIC is suggesting. Another subclause which I've selected to discuss with you this morning is subclause number 1.9. Under this subclause, the contractor is supposed to give notice to the engineer whenever works are likely to be delayed or distracted because of the issue of drawings or other instruction which the engineer is supposed to issue. And when he issues the notice, must include enough details of what actually is looking for. And when he wants this information to get. The question comes for a FIDIC user, especially for contractor, what if he fails to comply with this condition? The answer is simple. If he fails this condition, if he complies with it, he's entitled to claim for additional cost and the time. Now, if he fails to comply, he loses his right to claim for additional time and the cost. So it is important for contractor to comply with this subclause. Another subclause which I've selected is subclause number 2.1, which deals with the right of access to the site. The employer must give the contractor right of access and the possession of site within stated time in the appendix to tender. Therefore, before signing the contract or before you start, as a prudent contractor should make sure that he checks if the issue of access to site has been resolved. Why? Because if there's some issues which are not resolved, then you should understand that there are many parties that are involved in this issue. For example, there are local authorities. In other parts of Africa, there's some traditional rulers who need to be also conducted before you can access the site, police, and the other government bodies, such as those dealing with safety, health, and the like. The good news is that should the contractor suffer delay and or incur any additional cost because of failure to get access to the site area, he should notify, subject to clause number 20.1 of the current edition of FIDIC, of his entitlement. Another subclause which I've selected, which is common in Africa, is permit, license, and approval. The contractor should obtain for the employer all copies of the laws of the country where he works. However, laws which are relevant to the project is going to execute. Also, he should query at tender stage which permit are supposed to be obtained prior to commencement of the works. Why? Because the process of acquiring these permits, from my experience working in Africa, is time consuming. So as a prudent contractor, he must make sure that he gets all this permit area. If he has problem, he should seek employer's assistance as necessary. Under this subclause, the employer's duty is limited only to providing assistance to the contractor. Another subclause which I've selected is subclause number 2.4, which deals with employer's financial arrangement. The employer, under this subclause, however, if requested by contractor, is supposed within 28 days to demonstrate his financial capability or financial arrangement. From the face of this subject, it is good to understand that if your employer has enough money. But there are a lot of challenges. The question comes, how does one make sure that even if the employer has demonstrated today that he has enough money to finance the project, but how can you be assured that he'll have that money through the duration of the project? This problem is big from my experience, especially with private sector. I've seen many private sector employers who finance the project as the project goes. They'll be doing some business. I think this is common even to ourselves. When you want to build your house, I don't think if you're going to put the money aside, what you'll be doing, you'll be working and you finance the project as you go. So this is fact of life, especially for private sectors. However, there are some other employers who are reluctant to give the evidence. And I've seen some other governments in one of our projects in Africa, when we asked for this financial arrangement, we were met with some resistance. It was perceived as if we were not respecting the sovereignty of that state. However, all being equal, one needs to ask so that he knows that there is enough money to finance the project. Because I've seen some projects, the employer has money only for advance. Once they give the advance, they expect the contractor to pre-finance the project at the end of the contract. So the contractor must be careful. I've seen also some employers who delete this subclause in totality. The FIDIC contracts guide, page number 78, suggests that if you are in position where you read the draft contract and the employer purports to delete this subclause, you should be careful and they should be concerned as why he's trying to do so. What happens if the employer fails to to give the financial arrangement, the contractor, through subclause number 16.2, can terminate the contract after 42 days. Maybe this is why other employers, they may attempt to delete this subclause to get away from this possibility of the contractor terminating the contract. Another subclause which I've selected to discuss with you is engineer's duties and authority. The employer normally appoints the engineer to carry out the duties assigned to him. This may be issuing instructions, approvals, and the like. But one challenging thing is like this. The employer appoints the engineer. However, the same subclause conclude by stating that any approval or similar by the engineer does not relieve the contractor any responsibility he may have under the contract. At the same time, under subclause 3.3, the contractor is bound to comply with all engineer's instruction or his delegate assistants. Now, one might ask a question. You have somebody who is employed by the employer. Any instruction or approval he gives, the contractor is bound with them. At the same time, the contractor is supposed to comply with all his instructions, so the contractor is always find himself in crossfire. He doesn't know what to do. Another subclause which I've selected is the same, is a continuation of this subclause. The question sometimes is asked, do employers trust engineers? I know there are many contractors here. If I was to ask this question, maybe one contractor may answer me. If employer trusts the engineer they appoint, my experience shows that some engineers, they are there just like, I call them ceremonial engineers. Why ceremonial engineers? Because they cannot decide anything without prior approval of the employer. Again, why fear? Employer, we all know our continent is full of corruption and other things. Maybe because of this fear, that's why there's no trust. On the other end, do contractors trust engineers? As we have seen, engineers are employed by employers. Now, how can you trust somebody who is under somebody's payroll? So this is the question. Let us hope that with the new edition of FIDIC, maybe Shivansh will explain us later if this thing has been taken away. But the current situation is that the engineer is perceived to be employer's personnel. And at the same time, even if it's his personnel, the employer himself does not trust the engineer. So as a prudent contractor, you should check in amended documents, like appendix to tender and the particular condition of contract, the duty of the limit of the duty of the engineer. Another subclause which I've segregated is determination. I know there will be some changes, maybe in the new edition. Subclause 3.5, among other duties of the engineer, allow him to determine. He can determine contractor's claim under 20.1 or employer's claim under 2.5. With regard to the contractor, in order to make sure that his claim is successive, he is supposed to abide with all procedures which are laid there. There are time barred, which has been a big problem, because I've seen some engineers which use time bar as an excuse for not determining the claim. Also, there's sometimes some contradiction between with the law of the engineer with regard to determination. If you take subclause 3.5 and the 20.1, and the many amendments which are always, which employer always put. So you need to be careful what is the limit of engineer with regard to time to determination. As I said earlier, the employer is employed by the employer. The engineer is employed by the employer. Some engineers, I've seen some engineers on site, they do everything to please their bosses. Let us hope that maybe with the new edition, the thing has been taken away. Again, subcode 3.1 also, it says that whenever the engineer is acting, the engineer shall be deemed to act for the employer. So again, the contractor is always left alone, having somebody who is supposed to help him or to determine fail, but who is linked to the employer. So it's something which the contractor needs to check. And I've seen there are a lot of problems in African countries because of this contradiction with the law of the engineer. Subclause 4.1 deals with contractor's general obligation. Again, even if the Red Book is the employer is supposed to design everything, but under this subclause, there's some extent of design the contractor must do. So the contractor must check at the tender stage the extent of which he's going to do design. Otherwise, he might find himself that he has a big task of doing design where he's not supposed to do that. I've seen also, because the contractor is supposed to prepare method statement or the shop drawing, some engineers, they ask the contractor some question as if he is designing, instead of just having something which can help in execution of the work. They ask many questions, which is like designing. So the contractor should check what is the extent of design before he signs the contract. The contractor also is supposed to provide some things which are required, things like plant, contractor's documents. There's a number of deliverables which is supposed to provide. Also, he's supposed to prepare some health, safety, and environmental plan. So you should check the extent of the document the contractor is supposed to do. Like preparation of method statement, as I said, which describes how work is going to be done. Another subclause which I've selected, which always causes problem, which the contractor must know how to deal with it, is clause number 4.7. Under this subclause, the contractor is supposed to set up the work according to information which has been given. The employer, he will always provide reference point like levels, coordinates, original points of the works at the beginning of the contract. The duty of the contractor here, before he uses this information, is to verify their accuracy. So make sure that you verify the accuracy of this point given. I have an experience on one of my road projects whereby the design, the road level we have given, the road was just hanging. So if we didn't check, we would have found that when we started setting out, we found that the road is just hanging. It doesn't tie with the existing ground. So the engineer has to give us new reference point. So this is very, very important to check the accuracy of the document given. The good thing is that for a prudent contractor, if you check the errors and you find that there's any error, this entitles the contractor to claim for extension of time and the cost. However, again, this is subject to subclause 20.1 of the contract. Another subclause which I've stated is subclause number 4.12. Why I've selected this subclause? Because sometimes there's some contractor who does not understand clearly the meaning of physical conditions. FIDIC Contracts Guide 2000 define unforeseeable physical conditions to include natural subsurface conditions, natural and artificial physical obstruction, and the chemical pollutant. Sometimes I've seen some contractors who think that climatical conditions such as direct effect is part of this. No, this is not part of this. Unless, I say unless, if it is exceptional rainfall. And this need to be qualified by referring to past rainfall in that particular area. What happens if the contractor encounter such unforeseeable physical conditions and which meets the condition? He should give notes under subclause 20.1 for his right to claim for additional cost or extension of time where necessary. Another subclause which I've selected is subclause number 421. I've seen many contractors who take this subclause for granted. This subclause is very important. It's very important in not only for monitoring purposes, but also in case there's any claim for extension of time. To that end, the engineer and the contractor should agree at the beginning of the contract the format of the progress report which they intend to use. If you read this subclause, there are a lot of information which goes with this subclause. Therefore, a prudent contractor should appoint a coordinator to compile the report by gathering information from other departments. I've seen some contractors who take this for granted. They just think that somebody can just sit down and prepare. Then you find yourself, you prepare a progress report which is not detailed enough. The other thing which is important to note with regard to this progress report is that it's part of the document which is supposed to be included when you are submitting your interim payment application. So if this is delayed, you submit your interim payment application to the engineer, he can reject on the basis that there's no progress report. So the contractor should appoint somebody to compile this. Another interesting subclause which I've selected is subclause number 6.9, contractors personnel. Under this subclause, the contractor personnel must be experienced, qualified, skilled enough to hold that position. But sometimes, if his skill may be a threat to the engineer, because this engineer, this subclause, the engineer may require the contractor to remove or cause to be removed any person employed on site or works. Now, from what I read this subclause, and from my experience of using FIDIC, I find this subclause, the interpretation of this subclause is not clear. It's not clear to the sense that one of the reasons which the engineer may order to remove the contractor's personnel is his failure to conform with any provision of contract. It should be appreciated that if the engineer issues an instruction, that is the provision of contract. And under the contract, the contractor is bound to comply with all engineer's instruction, whether the instruction is logical or not illogical, but he's supposed to comply. Personally, I have an experience on one of our projects whereby the contractor personnel was removed from the site by the engineer simply because he was prudent in notifying the engineer. Notification to engineer in case of any delay is not a bad thing. It's good for the project. However, I've seen some engineer who treat this as something aggressive. So this engineer, he used to treat any notes from the contractor as an act of aggression. So to get rid of him, he used the subclause saying that you have failed to conform with the provisional contract, I'm going to remove you. And remember that any instruction from the engineer, the contractor is supposed to comply. So the contractor was removed from site. However, the good news is that the issue was presented to the DAB, which at the end, it ruled in the favor of the contractor. So it was like wastage of resource. Another subclause I've selected is commencement of work. The contractor, once he has been given the instruction to commence, especially this is given 7 days after the issuance of a letter of acceptance, he should check to make sure that everything is in order. And the commencement is always, it starts unless is specified otherwise, 42 days after the letter of acceptance. So during this stage, the contractor should check issues of right of access to the site under subclause 2.1. He should check clearly again to know exactly all amendment in the appendix to tender and the particular condition of contract. There's also issue of compliance with statutory obligation. So this is the time he should check if everything is in order. If there's anything not in order, then he should make sure that he asks for the assistance from the employer before the commencement of work starts. Program of work is dealt with under subclause 8.3. Under current FIDIC, the contractor is supposed to prepare this within 28 days after receiving a notice under subclause 8.1. The program of work is very important, not only for controlling and the monitoring of the work, but as one of the supporting documents if there's any claim for an extension of time for completion. So an experienced contractor will make sure that his program of work is being updated from time to time to make sure that in case of any problem, then he can use it for substantiation. Another issue which is common in Africa is delay caused by authorities. Sometimes the contractor might find himself complied with all statutory obligations, but still is delayed. Most of the time, delays comes from if the project is tax exempted, the process of tax exemption, it takes longer. There's also issue of port clearance. Now, if you have a project which has been tax exempted, and then you're supposed to import some goods into the country or equipment, you have a number of authorities which deals with your document before your thing can be cleared from the port. This process is long, so the contractor should be careful. He should check. As advice, again, he should appoint somebody to deal with this issue, especially with this issue, because there are a lot of process, a lot of paperwork. So you should not take for granted that even if the engineer, the employer will tell you that I'll assist, yes, you assist, but the contractor also need to do something to make sure that things go quickly. What happened if delay is caused is caused because of delay by authorities? The contractor should give notes under clause 20.1. One important thing to note about this subclause is that there is no financial compensation. It's just extension of time. I don't know with the revised FIDIC, but the current one, it doesn't suggest that the contractor can get money. So that's why it is important for the contractor to make sure that he complies with such obligation and that everything goes smoothly, quickly. Sometimes the contractor must find himself in the situation whereby the progress of work is too slow and the engineer has instructed him to submit the revised program of work under subclause 8.3. Or, to other extent, the engineer has issued a notice to correct under subclause 15.1. This is something the contractor must treat with great care, because this can lead to termination of the contract by the employer under subclause 15.2. So whenever there's something like this, there's a notice, or the engineer keeps complaining that the work is being slowed, the contractor should be careful. Another subclause which I've selected is subclause number 8.7, which deal with delayed damages. This again comes if the contractor works are delayed, the contractor has failed to comply with the contract in compliance with subclause 2. This subclause empower the employer, subject to subclause 2.5, to take action against the contractor. Under current version, the notes given by the employer under 2.5, there's no limit. He can give notes anytime. There's no like time bar. So the contractor I'm glad that with the new edition, the employer is going to have time bar. So there's a specific days which are given for him to comply with this clause. The contractor, again, should have people on site who should request timely for an extension of time for completion where entitled to avoid paying delay damages. I've seen, especially with private sectors, other contractors rely on engineers or the employer's mercy to extend the time. They'll never do anything. They'll just sit there and then wait for the engineer or the employer to give them extension of time. This is it's not like that. The contractor should have somebody who follows, and if there's any legitimate extension of time, should request. Sometimes the engineer, as I said, they might not determine the extension of time requested by contractor properly. I'm glad to hear this morning that at least there's an introduction of notes of dissatisfaction in case of something like that. Subclauses 8.9 to 8.12 deal with suspension of work to resumption of works. Under this subject, especially 8.1, 8.9, it gives the engineer the right to suspend the whole or part of the works. If it happened like that, for whatever the reasons, the duty of the contractor is to protect, to store, and to secure the works. It should be remembered that the failure of the contractor to protect and store the works properly may jeopardize his right to claim for extension of time and cost when the work is being resumed. Therefore, the contractor should keep all records of what is happening. I know if the suspension is wrong, works can be deteriorated, so the contractor should take photographs of what is happening, keep this record properly, because they will be very, very, very important during substitution of claim. It should be appreciated that to an extreme situation, works may be terminated under subclause 16 if the suspension is prolonged within prescribed dates. The contractor also should check what tests need to be done at completion, but experience shows that most of tests are being done when works progresses. Sometimes he can be delayed by the contractor, by the employer. If it happens that the employer delay him, the contractor should give notice subject to clause number 20.1 for his entitlement to claim for additional cost or time as necessary. Another subclause which I've selected is subclause number 10.1, which deals with taking over of works and the sections. This is an important milestone to the contractor. Again, I've seen some contractor, they rely on employer's mercy or engineer to assist them to determine when the work have been taken. The situation is not like that. The contractor should have people on site who knows exactly what to do. Under this subclause, the contractor is supposed to give notes to the engineer and a copy to the employer not earlier than 14 days when he thinks that works are ready to be taken. The engineer, on the other hand, within 28 days from receiving the notes, he is supposed to either issue the taking over certificate or reject by giving reasons. The question comes, what happens if the engineer does not respond? The answer is simple. Works shall be deemed to have been taken over. What is the importance then of taking over certificate to the contractor? I've taken 5 importance of this milestone. The first one is that insurance and the care of the works passes to the employer under subclause 17.2. Delay damages ceases or reduced in proportion under subclause 8.7. The first half of the retention money shall be certified by the engineer for payment. So if the retention money was 10%, 5% to be released at this stage. The contractor also, on his side, he's supposed to start the preparation of statement to completion, which must be submitted within 84 days. It is from this day of taking over certificate, the defect liability period clock start kicking. So this is the time the contractor starts saving that defect liability period. So it is important that the contractor, he notified timely. Another sub-clause I've selected clause is clause number 13, which deal with variation and adjustment. This sub-clause empower the engineer to initiate variations. How? It can either be by direct instruction or a request from proposal from the contractor prior to issuing an instruction. When? This can be done at any time prior to issuing the taking over certificate. However, sometimes, as I said earlier, the engineer has no authority to amend. Under contract, the engineer has no authority to amend 3.1. Under 3.1, he may be required to seek or to obtain permission from the employer. So it's only the employer who can amend the contract. Therefore, it is important, I continue to insist, for the contractor to check the limits of the limit of engineer's authority in the amended documents, such as appendix to tender and the particular condition of contract. What is supposed to be done for proper management or tracking of variation? Any prudent contractor at the beginning of the contract should make sure that he agrees with the engineer forms to be used for tracking variations or any changes. And this form should state clearly how the variation was initiated, whether it was maybe verbal instruction or a written change on the drawing. I've seen some engineer who would just come and write on the drawing that go and do like this. If an engineer writes something on the drawing which changes the drawings, that is a clear variation which need to be considered. So that form should be indicated in that form how that instruction was being instructed. There's other instruction which comes through communication. So if the engineer considers that the instruction which has been instructed is a change, he should notify under subclause 20.1 his entitlement to claim for additional cost and time. Under this form, each variation should have a unique chronological number. And then at the same time, to avoid problem, because sometimes you can have a variation which is different from the work. The engineer can instruct a variation which is not similar to what you are doing. So to avoid, and you may be supposed as a contractor to come up with a new rate, to avoid this, the contractor should make sure that he gives the engineer right at the beginning the breakdown of his rate. This will be important in case there's a new unit rate which will be supposed to be used for variation. Again, if the instructed variation has time impact, the contractor should issue a notice under subclause 28.4 and 20.1 for his right to claim for extension of time and the additional cost. Another subclause which I've secured is subclause 14.5, which deal with plant and the material intended for the works. This subclause starts by stating that whenever this subclause applies, now With my experience and using our local, from where I come and the country I've worked, local form of contracts, the experience shows that with other form of contract, material on site are something are just like deja vu affair. Somebody can, when you start, you know that you have right to claim for material on site. Under FIDIC is not the case. I don't know with the revised, but under the current one is not the case. This subclause is applicable only if there's a schedule included in appendix to tender. This is only when this the interim payment certificate can include plant and material which have been delivered to site or unloaded to site. Now, I've seen also some employers, even if they know that they're supposed to include plant and material, if you read subclause 7.5, 7.8, which deal with ownership of plant and material, they'll amend that one. They'll say, instead of saying that the material ownership will be due when the material is delivered on site, they'll amend to read when material and the plant are incorporated in the permanent works. So as a prudent contractor, you have to be careful to know when and at what time the material are deemed to belong to the employer. So it is through reading properly this appendix, amended documents, you can understand. Another subclause which I've selected is subclause number 20.21, which deals with contractor's claim. This subclause deals with procedures which the contractor must follow, as discussed earlier on. With the new edition, there's some changes. However, with the current situation like this, the contractor, if he finds himself that he is entitled to claim for additional cost and time, or both of them, he is supposed to notify within 28 days when he's aware. If you read FIDIC Contracts Guide, page number 299, it suggests that notifying within these 28 days is obligatory. Why obligatory? Because failure to notify within these 28 days may be deemed that the contractor is not going to suffer from delays. So it is important he notifies so that the other party know that there's something which will happen. There's also other notices, as discussed this morning, which the contractor needs to notify as per the contract. So he should comply with all these notes and check the dates or the number of days which are supposed before his time barred. Under the current situation, the contractor under subclause 20.1 is supposed to submit his detailed claim within 42 days. As one participant asked the question, how do you define that is detailed claim? That is a question to be answered. The good thing is that, though it's easier said than done, each interim payment certificate should include additional payment which have been determined by the engineer through claim. This subclause goes on by explaining that if the engineer does not respond within 42 days, the contractor should consider that the claim has been rejected and refer to the dispute board. As we heard this morning, I know there's some changes which are coming. However, from the current situation, with my experience, The experience shows that it takes more than 42 days to get opinion from the engineer, especially for government projects because of many levels of approval. So let us see again with the new edition how this is going to be dealt with. Another thing is that, similarly, many employers are reluctant to honor interim payment which have been determined by the engineer. Again, it's the same issue of trust. So the engineer might determine the claim, but the employer might not pay it. There's the issue of restriction. Some engineers are restricted to determine in amended claim. Also, to some extent, some employers, they don't have funds. They don't allow funds for claims. So how do you determine it? You should check if the employer has enough money to fund the project, including additional claims. How do you do it? Is something which you need to be dealt with case by case, depending on the employer you are dealing with. To conclude, then there's some recommendation. With the current situation, the contractor should lead the contract properly, should understand relevant laws of the country which are relevant to the contract is going to do. Right at the beginning, he should find out which approvals need to be done from the local authorities. As I discussed, and it takes long period to get these approvals. There's also some statutory compliances he needs to know which he's supposed to comply with. He should read careful all the amendment in appendix to tender, because he might find himself that there's something which is amended which will have negative impact during the construction stage. Again, he should read careful what has been amended in a particular condition contract. He should comply with all notes time limits. As I said, he can be time barred. Having said that, this is where I come to the end of my discussion with the best practice in utilizing the lead book in Africa. Again, in the current lead book, let us see what will happen with the revised lead book, if it is going to resolve some of the challenges I've highlighted. To this end, I thank you for your kind attention, and I would like to invite any questions or comments. Thank you very much.